You're listening to episode 29 of the Ento Podcast, and on this week's show we look at edible insects are the future of food, says an Israeli startup Flying Spark. You're probably eating 1 to 2 pounds of bugs a year without realising it. Did I say that? Would adding culinary variety to your diet bug you? So all that's coming up on this week's episode of the Ento Podcast, so stay tuned.
Looking to stay up to date on all things entomorphagy? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Ento Podcast with your host, Ross Bell.
Hi, and welcome to episode 29 of the Ento Podcast, the show that brings you the latest news and views from the world of entomophagy and insects as animal feed. And I'm your host, Ross Bell. So this week we've got 3 stories, and the first story comes from No Camels, which is an Israeli innovation news website, and it's by Simona Shima. Edible insects are the future, says Israeli startup Flying Spark. Flying Spark, an Israeli startup who produce a fruit fly larvae protein powder, and they were accepted onto the IKEA Bootcamp startup accelerator. More than 1,200 applications from 86 different countries applied to join the bootcamp, but only 10 startups were accepted, Flying Spark being one of them, and the team will fly out to the IKEA Product Development Centre in Sweden in September for their 3-month programme. It was the issue of world hunger that helped motivate Erin Gronich to seek out insect specialist Dr. Yoram Yerushalmi in 2014 and work on a solution to help the millions of people facing hunger around the globe. And according to the World Food Programme, 1 in 9 people around the world will go to bed hungry tonight. Fruit fly farming requires very little water and no land. The flies harvest themselves, and most of their gut content is purged as part of their short life cycle. Fruit flies are a highly rich source of iron, calcium, and magnesium, and have an exceptional profile of amino acids. They're also free of cholesterol, antibiotics, and hormones. In the space of a year, Flying Spark has raised $1 million and is looking at going commercial by the 4th quarter of next year. Along with establishing an R&D centre in Israel, they are in the midst of raising several $1 million in a post-seed round which they will use to produce thousands of tons of their protein powder, which can be incorporated into all kinds of foods in their state-of-the-art facility. Their use of sustainable protein and innovative technology has earned support from The Kitchen, a food tech incubator sponsored by the Strauss Group, who are one of the largest food conglomerates in Israel, and the Israel Innovation Authority. They're also currently working with Grupo Bimbo, who are one of the world's largest baking companies located in Mexico City. So I like the story because it's the first one we've had coming out of Israel, and the first one I believe that's gone for a different type of insect other than the black soldier fly larvae. Again, these can be, by the looks of it, raised on waste produce, and if we can get something beneficial out of the waste rather than it going to landfill, then that's a really good sort of thing to do. And the fact they've raised $1 million already, and IKEA has taken them under their wing for their accelerator program, means that we should be seeing lots of good things coming out of Flying Spark in the near future. This week's second story is by Danielle Jackson and is from Delish. You're probably eating 1 to 2 pounds of bugs a year without realising. We've all heard the stories about the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, allowing a few bugs in packaged foods, but learning just how much might turn your stomach. It turns out that most of us are getting more protein than we realise, to the tune of 1 to 2 pounds of things like flies, maggots and mites a year. The FDA refers to this as non-hazardous, naturally occurring, unavoidable defects, which refers to things like maggots, rodent hairs, and insect fragments. According to the FDA's sanitation standards, a lot of foods actually have maggots and other gross insects hiding in them. For example, the FDA's website states that up to 5% of a can of brined or maraschino cherries are allowed to be contaminated by maggots. Canned fruit juices are allowed to contain 1 or more maggots for every 25 millilitres, while mushrooms, canned or drained, are allowed to have 20 or more maggots of any size per 100 grams of drained mushrooms and 15 grams of dried. And don't assume you're off the hook if canned fruit and mushrooms aren't exactly your favourites. Chocolate and chocolate liqueur is allowed 60 or more insect fragments, and 1 or more rodent hairs per 100 grams when examined by the FDA. Peanut butter, one of my favourites, on the other hand, is also allowed 30 or more insect fragments and 1 or more rodent hairs per 100 grams. While this news may not gross you out, the FDA assures that these defects pose no hazards to your health. They may make you gag or ditch that chocolate craving, at least for the next hour or so, but they're okay. So a lot of us who have been eating insects for a while have read the FDA standards, and so it doesn't come as anything new, but it's always nice just to inform new listeners who may not know that a lot of the canned foods that you eat and some of the dried foods, it's acceptable for them to have insects in. So even if you think that eating insects is a relatively new experience for you, the chances are they're not. So the final story for today is by Joe Pisani in the Shelton Herald. It's entitled, "Did I say that? Would adding culinary variety to your diet bug you?" While I was filling feeders in our yard, I opened a bag of dried mealworms and poured out hundreds of them on a serving tray. I knew the dinner guests would arrive soon, because mealworms are the favourite of blue jays. But actually birds prefer live mealworms to the dried variety because of the wriggling action. But I'll end up in a divorce court the day my wife opens our refrigerator to find a Tupperware container full of creepy-crawly mealworms hidden beneath the avocado hummus. So the dried variety will have to do for now. Don't think I'm crazy when I say this, but the smell is pleasant, in a strange sort of way, almost like roasted pumpkin seeds. It's the sight of them, though, that turns me off, because their bodies remind me of the diagrams of intestines that you see in the gastroenterologist's office. Bugs have that unsettling effect on us. Although we've all heard stories about hikers who have survived in the wilderness on slugs and worms when the food ran out. But a new era is dawning. After revision in food safety laws, the second largest Swiss supermarket chain has begun stocking the shelves with bug burgers made by a company called Ento. Switzerland is the first country in Europe to approve insect-based food for human consumption, and the fare will include grasshoppers, crickets, and my favourite, mealworms, which are the larvae of mealworm beetles. Ento have partnered with supermarket chain Co-op to offer the burgers and meatballs made with these mealworms, and it's time to push this cause in the USA. The first thing we'll need is an effective PR campaign to change the way Americans think. Either Taylor Swift or Kanye West, or maybe Derek Jeter, could convince their millions of followers that eating burgers is hip and good for the environment. The spokesman for the supermarket chain told Fox News, "We've always been at the forefront when it comes to finding new trends and offering innovative products. Insects present culinary variety and an interesting composition of nutrients such as proteins, unsaturated fatty acids, vitamins, minerals and fibres." She almost had me convinced. Why should blue jays have all the fun? I think Joe's got a point. We can get some big names behind the eating of insects. So at the minute we've just got Angelina Jolie. But if you think of Smart Water, which you've had stars like Jennifer Aniston and Kylie Minogue, who've got millions of followers being used in their advertising, and that'll sort of help the intake. But that's it for this week. And if you're in the UK and interested in trying to incorporate crickets in your diet, either whole or powdered, don't forget to head over to Crick 8 and pick up a pack of the cricket protein powder. You can find more at KRIC and the number 8.co.uk. Well, that's it for this week. So this is Ross saying, ta-ra for now.
Thanks so much for listening to the Ento Podcast. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit theentopodcast.co.uk and on Facebook and Twitter at the Ento Podcast. We'll catch you next time.